Hello and welcome to the FT's ongoing series of business technology debates. After a brief break, we're back looking at the key issue of IT security. What does it mean? And more importantly, can you ensure that your company is able to manage cyber risk effectively and efficiently? With me to discuss this and other issues are Professor Stephen Furnell, Senior Member at the IEEE, Mark Doutlich, Head of Information Law at Pinsent Masons, the law firm, and Brian Glick, Editor-in-Chief at Computer Weekly. Hello and welcome, gentlemen. Stephen, let's start with you. We hear an awful lot about cyber risk, but what does this really mean for the average company? What should people really be most worried about?
Well, I think the key thing for them is that this is all about safeguarding the data and the services that they depend upon in order to be able to do business, to run the organisation. So without this and without having appropriate safeguards in place, what they're at risk of doing is suffering business disruption, suffering damage to reputation, and other things that will basically be adverse to their operating circumstances. So this is taking into account things that are external to the organisation, so deliberate attacks and things of that nature, but also things that can happen from within their walls. So there's a whole range of different safeguards, both technically oriented and, if you like, human and process oriented, that need to be considered.
Are there things that are particularly the most dangerous? I mean, I think we imagine this attack from unknown hackers from the outside, but what in your experience might be some of the most common threats?
Well, I think one of the things that does get readily reported in surveys and things of that nature is around malicious code, for example. So that is, according to the results that we see, one of the most widely experienced types of problem, and the impact of that can be quite severe as well. There are other categories of incidents, so fraudulent activities within the workplace, the insider threats, which actually are rarer, but the impact of them can be more significant. But I think the key thing is that organisations need to realise that they're not necessarily going to be immune to any of these, and it's the whole range of things that have to be taken on board and protected against.
So having to look very, very broadly.
Absolutely.
And Mark, in your experience, I mean, again, what are the sorts of things that you have to deal with from a legal perspective, and what should companies be thinking about in terms of the legal risk or implications of these things?
I think there's a couple of quite different things going on. I mean, Stephen mentioned a number of risks. On one hand, you have a whole bunch of information and data which, as far as regulators go, there are fines for those, and ultimately, as far as the people who do business with the organisation are concerned, it's a trust issue. Quite separately from that, though, I think increasingly with some of these cyber attacks, what's actually happening is that organisations are not even aware that their own intellectual property, their know-how, is being stolen from under their noses by competitors and all sorts of other miscreants out there. And that's not something which is necessarily overtly regulated. That's just a competitive disadvantage for them.
And Brian, I mean, what's your view on this? Are companies generally well set up at the moment to be handling these cyber risks or not?
I think most companies are set up for the basics. They've got their antivirus software, they've got their firewalls, they'll have some rudimentary education processes in place for their staff to tell them about the importance of not leaving laptops on trains and USB memory drives not being taken out of the building and so forth. But I think we've seen enough evidence in the past to suggest that really most companies don't actually really get this until or unless something actually happens to them. The harsh truth is that the vast majority of attacks, successful attacks we see, are data breaches or malicious code that gets in, are known threats. It's not the sophisticated threats are the ones that the average business has to worry about. It's the known threats that that are happening day in and day out. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that most companies just aren't taking enough of that basic preventative measures.
So what should they do? What should companies be looking to do? Any advice?
Well, I think one of the things that they've got to have is some of this baseline technology that Brian was alluding to. So having the antivirus, internet security, firewalls, having appropriately patched operating systems, application software, all the things that they're relying on needs to be appropriately managed. I think in many cases there's evidence that people have been able to tick the box in terms of having the technology, but then have not necessarily managed it appropriately, and so actually they're still vulnerable.
And legally, Mark, is there a...
Well, yes. I mean, I think it starts with a difficult thing that is that many senior people in business find it difficult to quantify what the risk is. And therefore, when they are asked to make an evaluation, or it's reported to them that there's been an evaluation of the risks, it's difficult then if you don't know how to quantify that. As lawyers, we're always asked, well, what are the fines, for example? So at the moment in the UK, if it's a question of losing personal information, then you could be fined in theory up to £500,000, which is a lot of money. But actually when you start to look at these incidents, the big ones, and what actually happens in terms of all the other costs that come with that, some of them are less quantifiable than others. Reputation is a bit harder to quantify, of course, but actually, as Sony have found, and many others, it's extremely damaging. And you start to look at those and add those up. There are a lot of downstream costs then of cleanup.
And that all costs a lot. And Brian, a final word from you. If there's one thing you do today to improve your security?
People need to, organisations need to understand at a board level what security means. Most companies, every company now have procedures in place to protect their money. Procedures that have been in place and regulations around them for 50, 100 or more years. Data is the new currency for most businesses, and they need to realise they need to be as thorough in their approach to protecting their data as they are to protecting their money.
Well, so get it on the boardroom table then, I guess is the answer. So gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. I hope everyone else has found it useful as well. For more details and other videos in the series, please go online and look at ft.com/business-technology-debates. Thank you.